Horror movies use sound, music, visual effects, prosthetics and makeup, and clever camera work to create an atmosphere and build up tension in an attempt to scare the audience. In this video, we're going to show you how they managed to do this using 7 different techniques from different horror films. But beware, just like when you know how a magic trick is done, the magic is lost. Once you know how filmmakers create their horror, you may not be scared anymore. But before we dive in, let's take a look at how you can create horror yourself for free on Skillshare. I took a quick class with Henry Garcia, and not only did I learn some valuable tips on how to write a horror story, but I had a lot of fun writing it too. And that's what I like about Skillshare. No matter what your interest, guaranteed there's a course you can take on just for fun and level up your knowledge along the way. And if you're one of the first 1,000 to click the link in the description, you'll get a 1-month trial of Skillshare for absolutely free. So have some fun nurturing your interests. Now back to the horror. Animatronics can be used to create scary creatures or monsters of virtually any size and shape. For the 2019 remake of the 1998 classic Child's Play, they decided they didn't want Chucky to be fully CG. This was because Chucky is really supposed to be a child's doll that was possessed by a serial killer, so they wanted Chucky to actually be a real doll. Masters FX had to build 7 different animatronic dolls with interchangeable hands, legs and heads. The main structure was an aluminum skeleton that could be puppeteered using control rods. This skeleton was then covered with a vacuum-formed plastic exoskeleton, which was in turn covered with a foam latex skin. This skin was then painted and hair was added. The Master Effects team had to make many different heads depending on what was needed for the scene. A pair of fully articulated animatronic hands were made using tiny cables that were added through the fingers down the arm and out the elbow, where the puppeteer could control each finger independently by pulling on the cable. However, although this hand could, for example, grab a knife, it wasn't strong enough to be able to hold the knife and carry its weight, and so another hand was made with thick wire fingers covered in foam latex to accomplish this. Even though Chucky's body movements were controlled using rods, his face was controlled remotely. Tiny wires and servos moved his mouth, lips, eyebrows, and jaw. Digital effects were also used for Chucky, and a full CG Chucky asset was built, but this was only used in major walking or running scenes. Chucky's eye movements and color were also created digitally. Good prosthetics and makeup work can make characters look scary before they're even on set. In Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the 4 monsters that appear are called the Pale Lady, the Toeless Corpse, Harold the Scarecrow, and the Jangly Man. As you can probably guess from their names, these monsters' appearance and movements are humanoid. Since recreating the way a human being moves is virtually impossible with animatronics, and with digital effects it requires a lot of time and motion capture technology, they decided to make practical suits for the actors to wear. Thanks to the incredible illustrations that appear in the actual book, the style and feel of the monsters was clear from the start. So the design work that had to be done before they could start making the suit was mainly trying to extrapolate a 2D drawing into a 3D model. Spectral Motion was given the task of creating these suits, but because the creature performers chosen to portray the characters had some pretty unique attributes, in the case of Javier Botnet the Toeless Corpse he has extra long limbs, and in the case of Tori James the Jangly Man he has extreme flexibility, the suits had to be made specifically for each actor. First the characters were sculpted, then they made a mold, and then filled it with foam latex. Once the suits were finished and the actors inside, they then began the lengthy process of painting both the suits and performer with acrylics and makeup. Digital effects were only used on the Toeless Corpse, whose performer had to wear a little green sock on his big toe so that they could remove it later in post. Clever camera work and filming are also used to create tension in horror films, and sometimes it's just as much to do about what you don't show and what you do. In the 2020 film The Invisible Man, they used simple but effective techniques to create tension and the illusion of danger. Techniques like camera panning to an empty space. This gives the audience that feeling that there is something in that space even though they can't see it. Another technique is clever framing. By framing a shot with the actor to one side instead of central, the viewer's attention isn't only on the actor, but also drawn to the negative space to the side, again adding the illusion that there is something else in the shot. Another method is using the camera to portray the invisible man's point of view. In this case, the director used a robotic camera which could move a lot faster than a handheld one. This meant that he could create darting movements like rapid head turns, giving you the impression you were watching through the eyes of the invisible man. In addition to the actual background soundtrack of the movie, the use of sound effects is incredibly important to add to the tense atmosphere and also to disgust us and make us cringe. Sound is an extremely powerful filmmaking tool, and sometimes just the thought of a sound can make us react. Just think of pressing down a fork onto a plate and then slowly scratching it back and forth. Let us know in the comments if that thought makes you shudder or not. In the 2018 movie A Quiet Place, an intelligent use of sound was needed, not just because of the need to create tension, but because of the actual plot of the movie itself. The film's monsters had to seem repulsive, intelligent, and dangerous, and the only tools the filmmakers really had to portray these traits was sound. The echolocating sound effect had to sound natural but precise. This sound was using a stun gun on a bunch of grapes, and then slowing the sound down until they could hear the individual jolts. For the monster's footsteps, crab legs were cracked whilst wearing rubber gloves, and for when the monster opens up its ear, they twisted celery and lettuce. However, some of the most effective sound effects work in this movie was actually done with silence. Just as a camera panning to an empty space can create the illusion of some unseen presence, a soundtrack suddenly cutting to silence or a prolonged silent scene can sometimes create a more unnerving atmosphere than any sound effect could. A tremendous amount of work goes into building any movie set. Furniture, designs, and props all have to be period correct, have their own personality or reflect that of their occupants, and create an atmosphere in accordance to the scene that is going to be shot there. Although there are a huge amount of movies and TV series that had incredible sets, from the Shire in The Lord of the Rings' 37 hobbit holes built on 14 acres of land, to tremendously detailed interiors in The Queen's Gambit, it's hard to choose a favourite. But as far as horror films go, the Overlook Hotel in The Shining has to be up there with one of the best, and the way Stanley Kubrick used the set is pure genius. The Overlook Hotel was designed to look so completely mundane and normal that any action filmed there created a jarring contrast and therefore makes the audience feel uneasy. High ceilings, massive rooms, gigantic columns, and long passageways dwarfed the little boy Danny and his mother, making them seem small, vulnerable, and alone. Violet color contrasts were also used to maintain the uneasy feeling. An example being the scene where Jack exits the warm golden colored ballroom to enter the cold, surgical, and blood red bathroom. Kubrick also created unease through the audience's subconscious by using the hotel's layout. For example, if a character enters a room, takes a left into another room, then again and once again, you expect them to be back in the first room. However, if they appear in a different room, you may not realize it consciously, but your subconscious notes that something is wrong and therefore makes you feel uneasy even if you don't really know why. In the Overlook, corridors end in dead ends, windows that are on interior walls have exterior light coming in, and some rooms open straight out onto balconies. If you were to draw the actual layout of the hotel's floor plan, it just wouldn't make sense at all. Kind of like a nightmare. Timing is important in any film, but in a horror movie, it's even more so. While there are no strict rules for building suspense, there are some general guidelines that work as a foundation. Quick cuts and short clips will create a sense of urgency, and close-ups and handheld camera work can add to this feeling. Longer uncut shots can be used to build tension, and if a shot stays on screen for longer than the audience expects, it can make them feel discomfort as if something is about to happen. The editor should be able to understand the storyline, what the director wants to achieve, and the audience that is going to watch the movie. And with this knowledge, they must look for a balance in the movie's pace, building up tension but not stretching it out so far that they lose the audience's attention, creating frantic, fast-paced scenes but not so fast as to confuse the audience, and they must also time the scare shots just right. Too early and there's not enough suspense built up to scare people. Too late and it's too predictable and all the tension built up previously just dissipates. Most filmmakers try to avoid CGI as much as possible, preferring practical effects so that they can get everything in camera. But this has led to a general dislike of digital effects, with people thinking it's cool to hate CGI rather than embrace it as another valid filmmaking tool. For example, even though they used puppets and animatronics in Child's Play, had they not used digital effects for Chucky's eyes, it wouldn't have been half as dramatic. Had they not used digital effects on Scary Stories to tell in the dark, the toeless corpse would have been, well, just the corpse. The Invisible Man would have no suit, and A Quiet Place would have no monster. And from monster VFX to how to fund your first film, Skillshare has all the answers you'll ever need. So be sure to click the link in the video description, you won't be disappointed. Please give us a like if you enjoyed this video. As always, the links to the music used in this video are in the video description, and be sure to let us know in the comment section which movie VFX you'd like to see behind next.